being in the victim mentality as well can sometimes be a really comfortable place for
Right.
people because it's
Mhm.
what you've known, it's what you've lived in, it's what you've been inside. Again, at your core of self, that's what you've been for so long that it's a comfortable, safe place to be.
Hello and welcome to Self Talk. I'm your host, Rachel Astarte. Today I have with me Charlene Madden, and Charlene is a women's empowerment coach and Reiki practitioner who believes that everyone has the power to rise from the ashes, just like she has. And I want to welcome you, Charlene, to Self Talk.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
Yeah, great. So, we're going to be talking a little bit about this women's empowerment and how it shows up, how it showed up for you, and how you got to where you are. So let's start with that. What is your background? How did you get into this line of work?
I started as, I guess, a necessity for my own health and well-being. I had a pretty rough upbringing as a child. My parents divorced when I was a young age.
Mm.
I went to live with my grandparents, and my grandfather was a pedophile. So I actually experienced over 9.5 years of childhood sexual trauma.
Mm, wow.
So
So sorry.
there was no real counseling or follow-up. So I didn't learn any of the necessary coping skills or techniques that I needed to deal with all this trauma that I'd had in such a short period of my life.
Wow.
So I started down very negative thought patterns. I
Mhm.
became extremely depressed, attempted suicide a couple times in my life, turned to alcohol as a coping mechanism, which is quite normal. We just want to
Mhm.
numb all those feelings and
Absolutely.
sensations. And I was actually just 2 days away from ending my own life when I attended a workshop in the next town over where I live. And I heard three stories at that workshop that absolutely changed my life. Stories that taught me self love, self acceptance, and most importantly, self responsibility. And I left that event a completely different person and went out and started taking the positive actions I needed to not only change my life, but help other people change their lives.
Wow. That's an incredible story. And my heart hurts hearing it, but I'm glad that it turned out. I'm glad you're here and that you're doing what you do.
Mhm.
You touched on something that has become a core of your work, which is what you call the 3S philosophy of self-love, self-acceptance, and self-responsibility. Um, let's back up a second before we get into that. And I think all three of those are so important, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about them. What does the self mean to you? What do when we talk about the self, what is that?
For me, myself was my internal spirit as a person. It
Mm-hmm.
was, we have, the elements of self. We have the physical body, we have the emotional body, the psychological body, and also, I believe, the spiritual part of our being as well. And I believe, self is all of those aspects
Yeah.
put together. But for me, because my emotional and psychological self was so broken, and I call it splintered at that point. I was so splintered apart that I needed to focus on first putting those pieces back together so I could recognize who I was at my core as self, because I didn't know.
Right.
I was trying to be all of these things that I thought I needed to be for everyone else,
Right.
which is pretty normal for women, especially. We're trying to fit into this puzzle piece of who we're supposed to be.
Yeah.
And for me, at my core, as myself, I had no idea who I was, and I didn't know at that time what to do to really reconnect with that part of myself. So it was important to learn the skills to reconnect.
Yeah, and when you're a child and you're looking to adults to guide you, and instead you're abused, it can be extremely disorienting or identity depleting,
Mm-hmm.
So I really resonate with what you're saying, that I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what my potential could be,
Mm-hmm.
because you're getting these messages that um you're not cherished.
Yeah, I had
in
no
how
feelings of self-worth.
Yeah,
I didn't feel valued. I didn't feel worthy of even existing at certain points.
right,
And that's the key. We need to feel that self-worth.
right. It almost feels as though the abuser takes that away, or doesn't allow it to grow in
Mm-hmm.
some way.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and when you don't have anyone to talk to about it, that makes it worse. It just kind of eats the self away even further. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I grew when the abuse came out, I was still like I was with my grandmother after everything came out. And my grandmother was very old school. So it's, you put your head down, you do the work. So
Oh,
I learned a really great work ethic, but it was also, let's just move on from that. That's in the past. Let's just, move on. And the reality was, it wasn't in the past. I was carrying that with me.
sure.
And so as much as I appreciate her, work ethic, it really needed to, we needed to do the work in different areas. So
Yeah. It's like the work ethic becomes almost like another distraction, the way
it's,
alcoholism does.
yeah, I was
And
gonna say it was just another addiction in my life.
yeah.
So
Yeah, I was going to say, and thank you for touching on such an important point for other people who are listening, going through the same thing, that addiction of any sort is a natural response to pain.
mhm,
And the idea of just numbing, or at least alleviating some of the pain that you're going through. And yeah, very, very natural response to that.
mhm.
So let's step into your 3S philosophy. Let's talk about self-love. What does that mean to you, and how do you help others develop that?
I think first recognizing where my weaknesses were in that department. And when I work with my clients, I preach radical honesty, because I think until you can really get honest about where you are in your life, you can't change anything. You're going to, I always say the ostrich, as long as we're keeping our heads stuck in the sand, nothing's going to change around us. So I had to get really honest with myself. And, the first speaker that came on stage that day was an amazing bald woman who had alopecia, who had suffered with not feeling worthy and lovable because of her exterior. She didn't fit
Mm,
society's criteria of what a woman was supposed to be like.
right.
And I felt connected to that, some of her struggles with not loving herself. And I realized that I'd spent my entire life requiring my love to come from outside sources.
Yeah.
I hadn't felt loved by my parents, or loved by my grandfather, or loved by my past partners and relationships. I had been in a domestic violence relationship for almost 14 years prior to that.
Wow.
So I didn't feel loved, but I was still searching for that from everyone else, that
Right.
validation.
Yeah.
And when I stopped in that moment and went, wait a minute, if I just love myself, if I just start with that, it's got to be enough.
Mm,
Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if no one else around me loves me. If I love myself, that's going to be enough.
hmm.
And I started to ask myself then the question of, okay, so what would someone who loves themselves do in this moment?
Mm,
And I started going, okay, well, they're not going to self harm. They're not going to numb themselves with alcohol and drugs. They're not going to keep practicing destructive patterns. They're going to start looking for healthy coping mechanisms to help them through their lives. So that was my first key, was going, okay, you know what? I love me and that's enough.
yeah. Oh, what an important point too, and a distinction. I think a lot of people think self-love. Oh, I'm gonna get a massage. I'm gonna get my nails done. I'm gonna, take a bubble bath. that's nice, but what you're talking about is so much more fundamental.
It's at the root, it's at the core, which is where that's got to start.
Yeah, the part about not seeking outside validation is so key, because the one person that we're with from birth to death is ourselves, and that's our anchor, right? So having love for ourselves allows us to have love for others eventually, as soon as we heal that, which I think would get us to the next point, which is self-acceptance.
Right.
Talk a little bit about that, because that's not an easy thing for a lot of people to be self-accepting.
Right. And if you start with the self-love, then it trickles down to, well, I have to love myself, flaws and all. And for me, my struggle was with my mental health, because I had suffered with, mental health issues from the time I was 14, basically, and had been suicidal multiple periods of my life.
Yeah.
And always thought that, again, that I could run away and escape, because running away and escaping was one of my coping mechanisms.
Sure.
And I had to recognize that was going to be a part of me no matter what. Yes, I could learn, again, coping mechanisms to deal with it, but I had to accept that it was going to be part of myself. And when I deal with my clients, it's like, if someone has diabetes, they accept that that's a medical condition that they live with in their life. And it's easier, to deal with than if you have a mental illness. You're like, oh, like we feel broken and judged because there is still so much stigma around it.
Right.
So I had to accept that part of my life as being part of me and love it as well. And I remember hearing the speaker say, instead of fighting and pushing all of that away, trying to keep it at bay, she pulled it in. Fighting the darkness doesn't always works, but if you can pull it in, you can allow your light to shine into that darkness. Yeah. So for me, that's what it was. It was accepting it and saying, you know what, this is part of my life. I've lived with it. It's been that friend that I didn't want, but that has always been there. And I'm just going to accept it, and I'm going to love on that. I'm going to pour love into that part of my life as well.
Yeah. Was that hard to do?
Yeah, because I was still fighting the stigma and the shame. Like no one knew the struggles that I was having mentally. I mean, I was a master of wearing a mask. I lived a facade of that I was okay. I was a strong, confident woman. That's what everyone around me thought.
Right.
Because I saw that my mental illness as a weakness. And having to open yourself up and say, hey, this is me. It's terrifying to let people know, because there is still so much judgment. But again, I kept coming back to but if I love myself, that's enough.
Right.
So even if people judged me, I just kept cycling back to that, but I love myself and that's enough.
Right. Right. So you had that foundation
absolutely
of the self-love. So people don't understand. Right. And even if you have a room full of people who have been sexually abused, everybody's experience is going to be different.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that needs to be honored, because every self is different, so I think that's part of it too. What I was hearing you say is this idea of whether it's judgment or, being put into a victim category or something like that, which we don't deserve that. You know what I mean? I'm sure you are, and everyone is so much bigger than a label like that, and what happened to you was not your fault. And so why should you have to wear this label of victim? So that, I think, is so important. What you were saying about having that foundation of self-love allows you to say, what other people take from my story is not my concern.
Right. Yeah. And I realized that everyone's looking at, whether it's me or their own circumstance, everyone's looking through their own filter.
Right.
So, they have their beliefs about mental health or childhood sexualized trauma. They're looking at it through a filter that has been created for them and by them. Right. And I can't change their filters. So how they choose to look at it is not going to change by me. They have to change that themselves. So
Exactly. And that's such a really empowering thing to realize. And it's so much easier when you let go of trying to change how people see you, right?
absolutely.
Because
Yeah,
you don't have to worry about that. It's not about you, as you said,
exactly.
right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Beautiful. So that moves us into self-responsibility. Can you explain how that factors in?
Yeah. And again, I think once you learn the self-love and you've learned to accept the parts of you that are there, you now realize that it's your responsibility to make the change in your life. No one is going to come rescue you. You
Mhm.
have to take those steps. And I realized that, yes, I had gone through some horrible things as a child. I had, had a failed marriage. Then I'd had a domestic relationship that, was extremely violent. And you keep using everything as an excuse for where I was in my life,
Mm.
or I could just step back and go, I couldn't control what happened then, but I have the power to control what happens now in this moment and moving forward. I
Mhm.
choose to take responsibility, number one, for my actions, for my thoughts, my behaviors. And
Mm.
I know that if I can work on that, and it's tough for people because we like to place blame on other people. A lot of people like to live in that victimization
Oh,
role. Well,
yeah.
you don't understand. This happened to me. So it's like, yes, this happened to you, but what you are doing now is your choice.
Right.
It's like we have the power to learn different coping skills. We have there's so many options out there for mental health care, for
Mhm.
therapy, at least in Canada. I live in Canada. So
Mhm.
online support, that was a great thing that I learned in COVID, how much support there is out there online.
Mhm.
So we now can take the responsibility to search out, to educate ourselves, to find the help and the support that we need. But like I said, no one's coming to rescue us. We have to make that change, that decision to do it ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. That responsibility is such a huge part. And there's so many facets to it as well. I wanted to talk a bit about that victim mentality again.
Mhm.
Um, what is your thought about what makes people hold on to the victim label? What do you think is at the underneath that? Hi, it's Rachel here. If you'd like to dive deeper into your own self-development, but you're looking for an alternative to traditional talk therapy, I think you'll love the Foundation of Self Immersion program. For a full year, you'll get dynamic coursework you can complete on your own time, plus weekly coaching calls and monthly one-on-one sessions with me for personal support. Visit foundationofself.com and click on the events page for more information. That's foundationofself.com. Now, back to the episode.
I think I've always personally struggled with the word victim. I
Mm-hmm.
hated it, like
Or
when people,
survivor, for that matter.
yeah, I mean, to me, it always seemed like it stripped away my power when I
Mm-hmm.
heard
Yeah.
victim. And I mean, and it probably was just a trigger because my power had been stripped away as a child. So it probably just triggered me into it. I've done a lot of work. I'm not so hung up on the words now because words
Yeah.
are just words. It's the meaning that we attach to those words.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what comes down to it. When someone says I'm a victim, it's the emotion that they're attaching to that word. And I think for a lot of people, it'll justify
Mm.
some of their actions and their behaviors and the
Yeah.
things in their life. I can't speak for everyone. I mean,
No, of
everyone
course not. Yeah.
has their own reasons for why they're going to say that word, and I don't want to sound disrespectful
Mm-hmm.
to anybody. But I know myself when I used it, I was using it in situations where I was using it to justify my behavior.
Okay.
And that's when I stepped into the self responsibility. I needed to stop justifying the behavior and change it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think being in the victim mentality as well can sometimes be a really comfortable place
You're
for
right.
people because it's
Mm-hmm.
what you've known, it's what you've lived in,
Mm-hmm.
it's what you've been inside again, at your core of self. That's what you've been for so long, that it's a comfortable, safe place to be.
Yeah.
And stepping outside of that and embracing the self-responsibility and saying, I'm no longer a victim. I choose now to not be a victim any longer. I choose to take my power back. And, that's a scary place to be for a lot of people, because it's unknown. They've lived their entire lives in that state, and to step into something else can be scary.
Absolutely. And such great points there. And I wonder if what your thoughts are too on the idea of staying in a label, whether it's victim or survivor or whatever, that it becomes the identity in a way, because we want to be seen. We want people to understand what we've been through. And so to stay, as you said, it's comfortable. It's what you know. But there's also a part where it's if the pain hasn't been dealt with, right, then that becomes our identity until, it's almost as though we want a lot of people to see what we've been through to validate it. So this is what we were talking about at the beginning, with this misperception that that'll make it go away. If enough people see how I've suffered, then I don't need to use that label anymore. And it's never enough. That's why the internal work is so important. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. And I think it comes back to again, we're searching, like, I clued into the word you said, like, we're searching for that outside validation once again.
Yeah.
Like, I don't need society to validate what I went through to make it any more real and painful and impactful on my life. Maybe at that point that, it's like, yes, this is what I went through. But I didn't speak a lot about it, because to me, it was a symbol of a weakness for me, even though I had no control in the situation.
Right.
Because again, I was hung up on that word victim. So I think, again, I love when people share their stories about childhood sexualized trauma. Again, I think it needs to be spoken about. It needs to be normalized. And I think if you're doing it and you're speaking about it and you're saying, hey, this is what happened for me, in a way that empowers you to create change in yourself, as well as create change in the world around us, I think that's great. I think speaking those words for outside validation, for someone to say, oh my God, what happened to you is horrible. I don't think that's the right reason to share it. I think if you're going to share it to empower yourself, but share it for whatever reason you need to now.
Yeah.
Again, because everyone's at a different point of their healing journey. So If you've never shared it, share it. Find someone that you can trust, find someone safe, and share that part of yourself with that person, because every time you share it, it is empowering. It's like taking a little weight off that, we're like this. Every time you share it, you're coming up a little bit more. So it takes that weight off your soul every time you share it.
So we're not keeping it in the dark.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful. So you work with clients. Are they all people who have experienced childhood sexualized trauma, or so tell me a little bit about your practice.
I do coaching right now. I'm working on my counseling diploma at the present moment. So right now I just work mostly with women on coaching. So we're looking at where they are right now, where they want to be. I try not to dabble too much right now in past experiences. I'm very honest with my clients on what I've experienced and where I have come from and the struggles I've experienced. And a lot of the ladies relate to it. Some of them have never experienced any kind of violence on them whatsoever. So it's kind of a foreign topic to them.
Yeah.
But we just kind of focus on, okay, like I said, the 3 S's of I find most of my clients are struggling with self-love, dealing with that struggle for needing the validation and accepting, okay, here's where I am, here's where I want to be, and then taking the steps to move forward to get them where they want to be.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I was going to ask you, which of the three do you think women have the most trouble with?
Yeah, self-love for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah,
What do
I
you think
think
that's about?
we define ourselves by our titles.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, when you ask, a woman, well, who are you? What do you do? And it's like, well, I'm a mom.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a wife. Like, we define ourselves too often in society, with titles of service to outside things, and I'm always, I'm a woman who works to, help other people empower their lives. But at the core, I'm just a person. I'm a human being trying to exist in this world and make my way. So
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So, um, what what is a scary thing about the work that you do for you personally? What frightens you about what you do? Or you might want to look at it as, if you have some kind of unpopular opinion that is at the core of your beliefs, what might that be?
I think the self-responsibility aspect that I talk with, I get a lot of pushback from my clients because
Hmm.
they are still in that place of, but this happened to me.
Right.
Um, and so I find that I get a lot of pushback on the self-responsibility in the beginning. But then at the end, it's, people realize how empowering it is. The women understand that that's what they need to do to take back and make changes in their lives. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, I think a lot of people find talking about, the issues that I talk about can be off-putting because I'm very out there with my story, and because I've lived with it, I'm comfortable with it. It's all I know. And I want to share my story to impact other people's lives. And I always say, I just want to reach the person who was where I was, 7 years ago. I
Hmm.
just want them to know, like I learned that day, that, it's okay. Life can change and life can be amazing.
Yeah. Is there an aha moment in coaching where women are able to sort of recognize that, yeah, this happened to me and I'm really upset about it, but now I see that I have self-responsibility. Is there a moment that awakens them to that self-responsibility? There may not be. I'm just curious.
Yeah, I think when I'm talking about the self-love, and we come to the, what would someone who loves themselves do?
Mm-hmm.
And they start, when they, would someone, when I start talking about the experiences that they're going through, it's like, well, would someone who you love, would you want them to do that? And they
Mm-hmm.
start looking at, like, especially mothers of children, it's like, would you want your daughter to feel this way? Would you want your daughter to, go through these experiences? And I think when we look through our filter of how do we want the people that we care about to feel, we realize that, wait a minute, we're feeling the way we don't want them to feel.
Right. Yeah.
So we need to care about ourselves as much as we're caring about those other people.
Yeah, excellent. And it really does help to sort of look at it that way, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, wait a minute, I wouldn't want my daughter to go through this or think about herself in the way that I have about myself. Um, so what's the one thing that, if you could just sort of put it into everybody's consciousness, what's the one thing you wish everyone could understand or know? What would you like to share with everybody in the world?
I always stand back to the lesson that I needed to hear, and that you're worthy.
Mm,
You're worthy of everything that you want, but you're worthy of love from others, but most importantly from yourself.
mm,
Um, some of my clients have done things in their past that they're not necessarily proud of, and they think that that means that they're not worthy of having an incredible, amazing life. And
mhm.
I'm always like, it doesn't matter what you've done or who you've been. You are still worthy of making a change to step into the life that you desire and that you want, because you deserve it. We're all worthy of happiness. We're all worthy of love.
Mhm.
And I just want people to know that, because again, when you grasp that you're worthy, that's when the self-love creeps in there. So
Beautiful. Okay. That's a great piece of advice or information to for people to hold on to. So how can listeners find you, Charlene?
I'm on all the social media platforms, of course.
Okay.
Facebook, I'm on Charlene Madden, speaker and author. TikTok, Charlene Madden 1. Instagram, Charlene Ann Madden. You can find me, I have 2 websites. So for my speaking, I do charlenemadden.speaker.com. And for my Reiki and my coaching programs to work with me personally, it is ascensionwellnessstudio.com.
Beautiful. And I'm going to have all those links in the show notes. But for now, I just want to thank you so much for being on Self Talk, Charlene. This is so important. And I want people to go away with that message of how important they are, how lovable they are, and that self-love is the foundation.
Absolutely. And may I leave with one message?
Of course.
I always like to end the podcast with, if you are feeling lost and alone and you feel like you don't have anyone to talk to, please find me on social media, reach out to me. I'm available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week if you're feeling completely alone. I may not be close by, but I will come sit with you virtually in the dark, because I never want anyone to feel alone like I did. So please reach out. And if not to me, find someone else close by.
Beautiful. Thank you, Charlene. That's such an important message to know, that we're not alone when we're suffering, if we're suffering. Yeah. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Rachel Astarte from the Self Talk podcast. I'd love for you to send me your emails with questions or stories about yourself. What are you looking for? What are your questions? What are you grappling with in your own personal life that has to do with your identity, with yourself, with your very existence? These are the things that we're going to talk about during the podcast. And go ahead. It's all right. Get deep. I can handle it. So send them to Rachel@selftalkpodcast.com, and I'll see you on the next episode.